So instead of using a camera, we're going to use what I consider to be a much easier way to animate 3D scenes, and that is with a null object. First, let's create a null object. You do this the same way you create any other type of layer. You go to the layer menu or right click in the timeline panel. Got to have that selected first. Layer, new, null object. Now, a null object is what you're seeing here, this little red square, is basically nothing. I mean, the word null means nothing, so a null object is literally a nothing object. But because they are nothing, they're used to control other layers. And what's really cool is that if all of these layers are parented to this null, the null is the parent of all these layers, then when we move the null, all of the layers will move around this null object. And keep in mind that parenting controls 4 attributes. That is position, anchor point, rotation, and scale. And so the position, anchor point, rotation, and scale of this null become the common position, anchor point, rotation, and scale of all of the layers. So the changes we make to the position, anchor point, rotation, and scale of the null object also accordingly adjust every other layer. So let's go ahead and hit Command A or Control A on the PC to select all layers. And actually, I'm going to Command click or Control click the null object, and then take one of the pick whips from any one of the layers and drag it to the null object, and then all layers will be parented to the null. Now, in order for us to move it in 3D space, we need to have the layers in 3D space, but we also need the null to exist in 3D space. So I'm going to click the cube here. Now you'll notice that there's a visibility icon for the null object. That's just this little red square here. It really doesn't do us any good in this instance, so I'm just going to turn off the visibility to get that out of our way. Note that visibility does not affect the parenting relationship in any way. So I'm going to select the null object, hit the letter R to reveal its rotation properties. Now watch this. As I adjust rotation, we see that all of the layers are rotating around the null object. And so you can see, as I mentioned, it's so much easier to animate a project, or entire scene rather, using a null object than it is with a camera. Of course, cameras are much more powerful, but they're much more cumbersome. Having a point of interest and a focal range and all these different attributes you need to keep track of. So in this case, I'm going to animate this starting at a positive number here, positive 10 or so, maybe a little less than that, maybe 6. Click the stopwatch for Y rotation. Hit the N key to go to the end of the comp, and then take this to a negative number, and we'll pan the pretend camera around. Actually, we're just moving the null object to basically move through our scene. We could also select the null, hit P for position, then hit the home key, click the stopwatch for position, and then hit the end key and create another keyframe for position, which makes it look like we're zooming out a little bit. So that way we're rotating the virtual camera and zooming in as well. So let's hit the home key and preview our animation so far. So as this null object moves around, everything just seems to work and flow right. We have Marion displacing, the pool table displacing. The whole thing just really moves well in 3D. There are some parts where this guy appears to slide too much here on the left-hand side. And again, we could remedy that by cutting up his arm, separating it from his body in Photoshop so that we can put them on 2 different 3D planes. But I think this is a pretty cool scene as it is. I like this background motion. You could definitely see the difference in 3D depth between Marion and the guy standing behind her. And our clone job works pretty good, even though, remember, I reconstructed his shirt and that vest and his hand. But when it's moving by quickly like that, you can't really tell. Also, all the stuff we did to the background, it's looking really good. We're seeing the depth cues from the lights. Look how the lights pass over all those background objects, and they appear to just kind of be hovering and floating in space in front of it. So a lot of really cool 3D stuff going on here.